Okay, and you are live on Monday night. Welcome everybody. We're here to talk about. So you want to talk about race by Ijeoma Oluo. My name is Letty Garza, and I want to say I am from, but I am Epic Consulting, and I love providing this space. I think it's important to provide a space to have these conversations, and we're using the book to help guide us with these conversations that might be difficult. We have Richard and Bill here with us, our resident white guys. Can I say that? Is that allowed? Can I say resident white guys?
Let's just call it what it is. I mean, that's the only thing we bring to the table. So, yeah, we're both white and we're both guys. True.
And we're all learning together. We're sharing our experiences, learning.
Yes.
No other qualifications whatsoever, just white and guys.
Also, Kanuli Martin is here to start the show off with us. She's at the Henrietta Wild Memorial Child Guidance Clinic, and Delana is the program manager, and she shares amazing insight, personal and work-related. So today's topic is what are microaggressions? And we can start the ticker here. Whoops, not a ticker. What are microaggressions? That was the chapter title. And sometimes I think this word confuses people. They think it means something else. So I want to get your feedback, all three of you. What are some things you've heard? What do you think it means? What did you think it meant before you read the book? Have you seen it? Have you experienced it? Who wants to go
first?
In
anticipation of this conversation, we had a great dinner table conversation. There is a tradition in many Latin American cultures called sobremesa, which literally means over the table, which basically means you sit around after you eat and you talk about stuff. That's big in our family. But tonight's conversation, because they knew I had book club tonight, was microaggressions. And I think it's interesting. I think it would be interesting for us to maybe start by defining microaggressions. Like, how would you define that in, let's just say, for the sake of argument, in terms that a white guy could understand?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Are you expecting us to define it, or do you want to take a shot
Rich.
at it?
No, I want to hear Rich. Rich, you define it first.
Well, I think she talks about the bee stings, but as I see it, it's the constant poking, just constant poking you.
Mm-hmm.
He pokes you, once or twice. You may not really think it's that big a deal, but if I was continually poked, just talking about it, and
yeah,
we talked about touching hair, continually touching. After a while, you're like, "What the
slap it?
What are you doing? Stop!"
Right.
And I think that microaggressions must be that verbal poking. Any poking, verbal or otherwise, that gets you to that point to where you just can't. You're fed up. You can't. And you.
Okay, but so how do you know if something is a microaggression versus not a microaggression? How would you, Kanuli, you got something?
Well, if I might, I really wasn't, I hate to say it, I wasn't familiar with the word until after our former president was in office. And I heard the word, and then I looked up what microaggressions meant. But the thing about microaggressions, and I like how the author defined it, so you have it up there, Letty, small daily insults and indignities perpetuated against marginalized people and oppressed people because of their affiliation with that marginalized and oppressed group. But what it is the thing about microaggressions is that it seems harmless on the outside. And
nailed it.
Right. And a lot of people, we have this this huge definition of what racism is. It's saying the N-word. It's wanting to lynch Black people, and it's this huge definition of what racism is supposed to encompass. But it is the small daily attacks, if I could say, the insults in that definition, and that seem harmless, but they cut deeply. They cut at the fiber of a person, and and sometimes, again, people are harmless. They don't recognize that their ignorance is creating harm to people, and sometimes people do recognize it, but it is the idea of, I am ignorant about a person's culture, and it's okay for me to make these remarks because, hey, I don't say the N-word. I would never say that. And so sometimes people, because they don't buy into what we understand as active racism, that's not who they are. So they make these comments that seem to be innocuous, and they're very painful. In fact, as I was reading that chapter, I remembered, I kind of went back because I went to a Catholic school, and there were just a handful of African American people and or BIPOC people, and I remember comments said that wasn't meant to hurt anyone, but it did it sent a message: you're different than all of us. And it does kind of highlight again the idea of privilege. And you're not privileged to be in the group. So that's what microaggression is, and that's what it can do to what's considered marginalized people or BIPOC people.
I always, sort of the thing that occurs to me is a lot of microaggressions that are especially committed by well-meaning white people are in the guise of a compliment, right? You're very articulate for a Black person. Like, what? Or, you work really hard for a blah, blah, blah. Like, yeah.
Right. Not like the others. Yeah.
I think we call those backhanded compliments. But but if your compliment to that person is at the same time generalizing their whole group as a bad thing, that's not a compliment. Right. It's just like, yeah, I love Black people. I think your hair is very nice for a Black person. Like, oh my gosh. Like, are you not seeing? So one thing, the interesting conversation we had at dinner tonight in our Sobre Mesa time was can you think of a valid microaggression for a white person that you would say to a white person? Because this is the kind of weird conversation we have in our family with all of the racial backgrounds, and the only thing we could come up with is, you're not very racist for a white person.
For a white person, right? That's hilarious.
Wow. It's just like, but it's sort of telling, right? I mean, that's a sort of idea that, okay. Anyway.
We have a comment from Maggie here, and I think this is probably closer to the definition in the book, because you do have to think about any of the words that we use, right? The impact on the person that you're using them on, and if we're saying that there is a difference, and maybe you can't really find something legitimate that you would say, because I don't think you would say that in a work environment, Bill. But there are plenty of things in a work environment that you would say to someone that what is going to impact them negatively, and you may or may not know that it's going to impact them negatively, because she does talk a little bit about how you may not realize that it's a microaggression because coming off as helpful, or you're trying to come off as helpful, your intentions are not that. But if I'm telling you and I'm defining it that way, that makes a difference. So thank you for that comment.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to say the perfect example was what she said in the book about what her director said to her, showing her that he's, woke. Did you see the Chris Rock about, the Chris Rock video about good? So I think sometimes people are doing a little bit of research to be woke or to be relevant or to kind of be an ally, but still are making these wide assumptions, or like she said, comparing me as the good, curly haired Black girl, because she decided to wear her hair natural, against all of these others who are, fulfilling these Eurocentric values or ideas. And so that was a perfect example of people who are well-meaning but swinging wildly and widely and creating harm to others unknowingly.
I would say you're in dangerous territory as a white person anytime that you're trying to prove how woke you are. Like just
be.
Take a second and really think about what you're about to say. Think about the impact. I'm not going to say that I haven't even fallen victim to that, but I think well-meaning white people really want people of color to know that they care. And oftentimes in their ignorance, they are the bull in the china shop, just making a mess of everything.
Yes.
I should even say they, I should say we. We are the bull in the china shop. Because I have no doubt in my mind that even today, even with all of my kids and, as much as I put time and effort into trying to really understand what I can do to be an ally, I know that I'm clumsy and stupid and I say things that I shouldn't, and maybe I'm doing it right now. Who knows? The reality is there's a lot to learn, and not having the experience of a person of color makes it a challenge to understand, and it really takes a lot of effort and a lot of humility and a lot of willingness to listen when somebody says, hey, don't say that thing. You are messing up. You are offensive right now. And saying, okay, I apologize. I want to learn from this. I'm going to listen to you. And next time I won't say that.
How many times, Bill, do you think white people will say, if they're lucky to have somebody that speaks up and says, this is what you're saying is really offensive, give that final statement that you said, I am so sorry, and then leave it at that. I tend to think that they go the direction of, I didn't mean to offend you. I was just trying to help.
I don't see color, right?
I don't see the is probably more, the truth of, and then, it is always an attempt to be an ally. I think that,
Listen, there's a lot of well-meaning white people out there that say a bunch of really harmful things. True story. They mean well. They don't understand. They think they understand. They don't understand. I don't know what the answer to that is, except by myself modeling like the humility and just saying I'm going to learn everything I can, and when I mess up inevitably and say something stupid and say something out of my own white ignorance, that if somebody is brave enough to challenge me on that I'm going to have the humility to say, you're right. Thank you for instructing me. Thank you for engaging with me. Thank you for educating me. That's really what we can do, I think.
Yeah.
So if there's no commitment to learning, though, to learning historically, not just learning historically what it is that you're feeding into, but So you're acknowledging it, and then you're accepting that that's part of what is, created the system that allows you to maybe perpetuate those microaggressions on people. If you're not, if you really are just intending to be nice and you don't realize that you're saying, let's be honest, stupid shit to people, that what is it that's going to, I mean, do we keep doing workshops? Do we send people back to school? Do we acknowledge that there's more education that needs to happen and we build out a whole new system? We have talked about dismantling everything and starting over. What does that mean? People get really pissed off when you start talking about things like that because they benefit from the system. And I know we're not going to come up with answers right now, but I say all these things because I wanted to share this quote from the book. I would be having a good day, lost in my imagination, and bam, I'd be hit with a comment that would remind me that I was not allowed to get comfortable.
Yeah.
And so we talk about bee stings, we talk about the 1,000 cuts. I feel like this idea that you cannot go about your day comfortably, you can't walk down the hall, you can't eat lunch, you can't be in the store, that you are constantly ready, waiting. I don't know what the word idea that you can't get comfortable just being a human being in that space.
Yeah.
What that's like another level of even illustrating the 1,000 cuts or the bee stings.
Yeah.
Because when you say that, people imagine it all at once. At least I do. I feel like maybe that's what's lost in translation, is that, oh my God, it's 1,000 bee stings. It's like, no, really think about what it would happen if you got stung every single day by a bee.
Right.
What that would do to you physically, emotionally, mentally, like every day, your whole life.
Yeah.
Really think about it.
I like what the author was sharing about when she went away for that weekend. And, when you are getting stung every day by 1,000 bees, your armor is up. Cue the angry Black woman, angry Black man, personality type or stereotype, I should say, because your armor's up and you're prepared for, okay, where is it coming from now? Like which this is not great. You're expecting it. You begin to expect it. But the comfort that she received on that weekend when she was away by, with a group that was similar to her, and you could hear kind of the conversation she's having in her mind, like, oh, not only am I African American, but I'm the fat African American one, so I have to be careful about, the stigma of being overweight. So I have to be careful on what pizza I eat. Oh, it's okay to not eat salad pizza. I can eat like the greasy swine pepperoni pizza like everyone else. And yeah, the thing about microaggressions, or just the general idea of racism in our society, is that people cannot be at peace because they are expecting a barb. Or especially if you're in corporate America, you're around people who don't look like you, and you kind of have to monitor your own expectations so that you're not always on guard, and that can be very painful. It's like dying 1,000 deaths every day. For example, my daughter, so we live in the Rosedale area, and we're few people on my block look like me. In fact, no one does. And so we always get this neighbor who always waves, which is much better than the neighbor that gawks and then turns their head. That's much better. So I appreciate the wave. So my kiddo goes to a school out here in Rosedale. And she told me, I think it was yesterday, only African-American kiddo in her class, where they're going. And I think we kind of talked about this last time. They're starting to touch her hair. And I'm getting ready to get on my broom and fly over to the school and set it on fire. And my daughter is like, hey, number one, I don't care what they say about my hair. My hair is the bomb. And number two, they call my hair soft and fluffy. Sometimes it is soft. Sometimes, so I'm battling between, do I enforce this? The chapter before is about hair. Do I let my 12-year-old read it? Do I enforce my own opinion on her about it? If she's cool, do I explain to her this is racism? Where in her mind, she's like, well, you got a bunch of redheads, you have one blonde hair, you're paying attention to the blonde hair. In her mind, she's not looking at it as a microaggression. So in other words, I don't want to be victim status here, but it is every day monitoring, managing my own emotions, my family's emotions, my kids saying so and so said this. It's a battle. It's a battle. And so what is the answer?
Well, do you think that maybe it also has to do with whether or not that understanding of what's happening, if it's not bothering her or she doesn't see it that way, then that's a different example than the one in the book, right? Because she does say, I think, yes, she was sure she was the problem because no one came to her defense. And so if it's very obvious and she feels left out and she feels isolated and that, then that's a different conversation than the one that you're having where your kid is like, I'm the best thing in that classroom. What are you talking about? I feel I don't feel like an issue.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that
are we doing a good job with our kids?
Yeah. Well, I think that is the answer. Is how do we raise this society in our responses instead of, and I'll speak as a BIPOC person, getting angry with people who are, allies and they just need education. Instead of getting angry, say, hey, let's try this track, or, not being angry, not being, forgive me for saying this, easily offended, looking for or expecting, why are you looking at me? Well, because I like your outfit. That's why I'm looking at you, so that's what we need to own, I think. Being open to teach for people who are genuinely wanting to learn, sitting down and having these conversations and raising our children to be better.
You said something interesting.
Yeah, in the comments, we do have, hang on, Richard, I want to put this up on the screen real quick. This is a comment from Facebook, and these are examples that I think, like you were saying, Kanuli, people can get offended. You're saying these things and using words like ghetto that we already discussed several times. This idea you're not ghetto, and then the person's like, what is that? What the hell does that mean? What does that mean to you? Why are you saying that? What do you mean when you say that? And so, like, do you get in their face? Do you ask for an explanation? The whole idea of like being in jail, or the way that you dress, or the way that you speak. All of those things can be triggers for anger, anxiety, stress, whatever. So when she talks about those tips, like, this is what you can do, and one of them is ask follow-up questions, like ask questions like, what did you mean by that? And I don't know if you guys get this idea that if you start doing that, people will stop saying those things. Maybe at work.
I'm wondering if there's Kanuli had talked about putting on armor and constantly, because of microaggression, being forced to wear armor, keep putting it on, and which restricts you on being vulnerable and having good conversations and those kinds of things. And so it sounds exactly like trauma, and so. Do microaggressions then lead to micro traumas and that feeling of that? And so, I see a therapist. I talk about things. I have my own little traumas, but I'm also thinking nothing compared to the daily grind of these type of microaggressions. and how that makes you changes your personality. We all know that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what's worse, registering those traumas, or when you get to the point where you've internalized those comments and those ideas to the point where it doesn't register as a trauma with you.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that, like, for my own kids, like, I always want them to be pissed when somebody says something stupid or touches their hair. I encourage it, because the day that you just accept it or allow it, to me, that's when you've lost the battle, you know. And I get it. I mean, if you're stung by a bee for 1,000 days in a row, like, at some point you're just like, that's my life.
Yeah.
And that's,
Right.
to me, the worst possible outcome. So, I want my kids to always be pissed off when somebody does something stupid. I get the exhaustion. I understand it on an intellectual level. I certainly can't relate to it on a personal level, because I'm a white guy. I mean, we get away with all kinds of stupid crap, but but for sure, I mean, I understand.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what we cannot allow microaggressions to become normalized.
Yeah.
Or I guess we
Agreed.
should say we need to work to disallow them from being normalized, because they, in some ways, they've always been normalized, or they've been normalized for a long time in the history of this country.
Yeah. We don't want apathy to rule our hearts. We don't want to become apathetic.
Things.
Okay. Yeah. We don't want apathy to rule our. It's okay. Apathy. We can become very apathetic, and like you said, normalize this as part of our culture. But I also have to say, whether we're angry or not, we got to do something more than be angry. I want to say that I want the anger to create passion, to drive us to become impassioned, so that the anger is effective. So anger is cool. I don't think people should. I guess I want to say anger, I think, outranks apathy any day of the week. We don't want to normalize the ills of society, microaggressions, racism. But I think just being angry is just not effective. I know it hasn't really worked.
So would you say then that there's I don't want to use the word training, but there's some mindset shift on maybe on the part also of BIPOC people, where maybe we don't have to get so angry. Maybe there's help for us to figure out how to deal with those things. Some of the things that she talks about in calling things out don't have to be confrontational.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is it's going to feel confrontational or combative to the other person.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're just repeating what they said or asking why they said what they said, then you don't feel exhausted necessarily, because you don't have to get emotional about it. And maybe that's because, like Bill says, maybe you knew it was coming. Maybe you weren't surprised that it came. And so you're not immediately rushing to that, that physical response or emotional response. So maybe we need to do some training for ourselves as women, as BIPOC, that here are some ideas. Let's really take what she's saying to heart and create like a self-preservation sort of response. I don't think we're taught that. I don't think we're taught that. So this is one of the things that she says in response to a microaggression. I'm assuming this can be in the workplace, in a supermarket. I mean, with strangers, I guess this could be the case too, but that could be scary. If you're calling it out, if you're stopping the movement and saying that thing you did, and then just say what actually happened, and then maybe ask a follow-up question. Ask that uncomfortable question, and then keep asking the question. I feel like asking why forces people to really think about what they're doing or saying. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah. Or what did you mean?
Why?
What did you mean by that? What did that mean? I didn't. What were you saying? Could you repeat that? I think for me too, the idea is I don't want either one. Now I'm already offended by what you said. I don't want you to just walk away offended. I want you to walk away educated. I want you to understand why what you said was inappropriate. So okay, I'll give you two examples. One was when I was in college 25 plus years ago. I was in a writing class, and there was this really peaceful skater dude who was just a great poet, a great writer. And, we had to share our poetry, and someone said, Kanuli, this is kind of the saying back in the day. The saying was, you're all that in a bag of chips. I'm a 90s baby. So that's what they said. He said, this poem that I had written, he said it was all that in a bowl of grits. And I'm like, how come mine has to be a bowl of grits? And so now this was on the heels of a huge, we had this race thing that erupted on campus because we had a Miss Black Wright State University. And somebody put up some posters of Miss White Wright State University. So all of the Black people were, rallied. We were incensed. We were angry. So this was on the heels of that. So I asked, I was on one of the that leadership committee when we were trying to come together and have meetings about what had happened. And so I asked my friend, look at what he said. And I went to go tell him. I had the conversation, and it was a moment where I could educate. These are not, when you say that, this is how it's taken. And he genuinely, so two things happened. He genuinely felt, you could just see, he felt ashamed about what he said. He walked away. And I felt like with his personality type, even though he walked away with education, he also got a little bit of this whip. And I think I would have handled it differently because I could have, that's a relationship that could have been valuable. And so I agree with you, Letty. I think we need to find ways to communicate our offense. And it would be great to be able to maintain networks and contacts and be able to win people over as allies. And I don't think we're always great with that.
Well, I was thinking about, did you say surfer dude?
Skater dude. He was a skateboarder.
I like to think that I would respond like the skateboarder, with kindness, but yes, embarrassment, but appreciation that somebody took the time to educate me. And I'd like to think that's how I respond to things. I'd like to be that skater dude. But I also know there's moments if I was ever called out that I get angry. Like suddenly my defenses go up. I don't know where it comes from. I get angry and my reaction is totally inappropriate. And then realize that I'm a 6'4". I'm not a skater dude. I'm tall and it looks aggressive. And I need to learn to not have that reaction, not be so defensive, like somebody called you out just to embarrass you in public, when somebody actually is giving you that opportunity to learn. I like to think I'm getting better at it and being more skater dude like, but if somebody calls me out as a racist, my defenses go up. And then I feel horrible afterwards, like I was a racist in that moment, and but there's something internal to white people that puts those defenses up, and I'm thinking it's a loss of power in that moment. It could be all kinds of different things.
It's interesting, Rich, that you say that, because my personal feeling is that the reason that's such a trigger for you is because you care so deeply about not being a racist, but also in our society, if you read Dr. Ibram Kendi's work, How to Be an Anti-Racist, he talks about the fact that racist has become such a loaded term as to be actually less than useful, or actually almost unuseful to the cause of ending racism, because we've made racist into such an evil term that you're personally evil if you're behaving in a racist way, that people respond so negatively against that they are closed. It closes their mind to the idea that racism really isn't just a personal attribute, but rather it is an act or a way of acting that either perpetuates or opposes the systemic racism that is more insidious even than the personal racism that's out there. I mean, the personal racism, I'm not going to say it doesn't exist. It sure does. There are plenty of people out there that are personally racist, and that is a pretty evil thing. But it shouldn't be confused with a racist action that many people exhibit, that either perpetuates or oppose. Yeah, just sometimes regardless of what they mean. I could mean to be anti-racist or race neutral. We know that something race neutral doesn't exist. A little secret. But we could be thinking, oh, I'm going to be race neutral. I don't see color, but I'm going to say this thing. And in fact, the thing that I'm saying is perpetuating a racist idea, or contributes to a racist system. So it's tough.
Or
it is, because racism, or being a racist, is such a loaded word now. It is. It's a hard thing to deal with. But it sort of takes away from the big picture view of systemic racism and the part that everybody plays in that systemic racism. So that's what I love about Kendi's work. Not that I agree necessarily with everything he says, any more than I agree with everything anybody says, to be honest with you. But the great thing that he points out is, let's keep our eye on the ball. And the ball is systemic racism.
Right. Not this pejorative term of a person being racist.
Yes.
And I agree with that. I think it's not effective. It doesn't move toward educating people. This kiddo, the skater dude, was a great, sensitive soul. This was his way of trying to connect. He wasn't the idea, racist, and that's my point. There are people who want to connect, but they don't know how to connect. And as you were saying, Letty, how do we deal with the idea of, which you said, it may not have hurt, but it made me feel so much different than this group. It made me feel like I didn't belong. how do I deal with that? And, you know, this is the therapist talking. How do I deal with that emotion, but still see beyond how I'm feeling and look with compassion, and also help you learn how to carry a torch and carry the baton to the next person. And so that's why it is, you know, I think we battle between, you know, how do I deal with race, the ism, systemic racism, not become, like you were saying, Dr. Mosley, not become apathetic, but still become effective in, you know, in the fight. So I just feel like it's you know, I'm trying to learn that balance myself.
But I wonder though how difficult it must be to call somebody out, and even in a sensitive way, knowing that the response could be anger and violent, not so much in a physical way, but in just the look on somebody's face. And so, yeah. So I think on that side of it, on the receiving end of being called out, and I've taken such a different view on it now that I cherish it. If I'm saying something that's offensive and somebody calls me out, I really want more and more to be able to apologize and then thank them for bringing it to my attention, because I want to be better. But those changes have only started happening within the past couple of years, and I'm very blessed to have people in my life that are free to talk to me about it. But I wonder at the where people of color must carry an innate fear to bringing something up like that, and the courage it takes just so impresses me. And I'm just, I don't know. That's where I sit as you're talking, and some of the conversations I've had with friends of mine. That there is so much courage within the you know, marginalized community, and patience and understanding that blows my mind. And that concept is hard for white people to understand. You know,
Yeah.
you've been beat up, not you in
Right.
particular, but people of color have been beat up so long. Where is this compassion coming from? Where is this? I want to be kind, and I'm going to take this teaching moment and teach this white person, and where we've never done anything to deserve that kind of compassion and empathy. I don't know.
Survival.
Survival, I think that's true, because I think culturally, and, you know, in our Western civilization, just even when she says it's a horrible feeling, what you put up, Letty, it's a horrible feeling to speak out against microaggressions in a room full of white people and be met with nothing but hostility or silence. I think people are trained to understand that since in numbers you're considered the minority, and I don't like that word anymore. It's a ugly word. You recognize that people aren't going to understand your burden. And so I think, like you said, Letty, just culturally, there's an understanding that because of the numbers, sometimes it's a numbers game, or because of power, privilege, you're a warrior. You are a survivalist, and you just understand this is, you know, I hate to sound like this, a victim. This is your lot in life. This is how it is. This is what you were born you know, in the skin you were born into, or the gender, or whatever. It's just how it is. But I don't feel like every person is compassionate, but I can't expect, the dominant culture to be compassionate and me not provide compassion. Like, it needs to be that if I want, as a Christian, I believe you reap what you sow, and this is me, and I believe that I want in my own life to give. I want to receive something, so I give what I want to receive. That's me. Definitely not easy for me. I've had to have many conversations in my own head. Don't say it. You want to say it, but this is probably, you might lose your job if you say this one. This might end up being a bad thing if you say it. But the other piece of that is, what is going to be most effective in this fight? What tool do I want to use? Do I really want to shank someone with my words, or do I want to reach somebody? So I think that's the other piece is, the means. What's that saying? The means justify the ends. What's the saying?
The ends don't justify the means.
Don't justify the means. Thank you. So I got to look at the outcome. What's that's something we all have to do. What ultimately do I want to see happen? And so since this is what I want to see happen, what is my plan that's going to be most effective? Do I come out with guns blazing, or do I try to create a pathway of peace, compassion, education?
Yes, we got a comment just along those lines, right? We keep saying, don't get angry, educate. And it can be exhausting. But it can also be within family, because we also have a comment here from Sally where she says her own daughters have called her out. And so when your kids are saying, it's so funny because this is funny. After we had the chapter on saying the N-word, why can't I say the N-word? We got in the car and it was maybe a couple of days later, and my son and I got in the car, and there just happened to be, I'm totally outing myself, there just happened to be on the radio, because I plugged my phone in, and DMX came on.
Because that was the song you had queued up.
He looks at me, and he hadn't heard the broadcast, but he knows that we're talking about it. He knows that we're talking about it. And so it comes on, one of the songs comes on, and he turns and he says, what did you guys talk about the night that you talked about the N-word and artists using that word? And I was like, I'm totally being called out. So I turned it off, but it was like, okay, so if I'm really going to live in that, I'm going to walk the walk, and I'm trying to educate people, and I'm trying to be a good example for my kid.
Yeah.
Then I don't listen to those songs? Question mark. I'm writing myself out, but still.
That's a great question.
Seriously, somebody
that's
just
great.
said, "Go, Ben." They're cheering my child on for calling me out. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so we've been paying a lot of attention to the people who perpetuate the microaggressions, and I feel like if we could do a workshop series, if we could set up a space where we have this opportunity, then we can go through some of the recommendations here. And the first one is, if you are called out, if you're in a space where someone says, what did you mean by that? Or they're more upset than just saying, what did you mean by that? The first thing you should do is pause. It seems like a simple thing. I think the expectation is that when we receive or hear a microaggression, that we also pause or not react at all. and then ask the questions. And then for this, I think that because there is an emotional reaction to some sense of vulnerability or shame or embarrassment, I mean, this is good advice for just about every stressful situation, right? But when you don't understand why you're being called out, it's probably a good idea to just shut up and listen. She doesn't say that, I'm saying that. Also, ask yourself, would you say that to a person of your own race? How do you know if it's really related to race? At the beginning when we started this conversation a couple months ago. So would you say that? This one, I think we've kind of touched on a little bit throughout this conversation about good intentions, good white people, trying not to say the wrong thing. Don't force people to acknowledge your good intentions. This is the worst. It's the worst feeling to have that perpetuated on, to have the microaggression perpetuated on you, and then to also be expected to give grace and understanding, and then tell the person, but you're doing a good job.
Yeah. The message, I think, to white people out there is this: it's not about you. I mean, I think that's the basic message.
Yeah.
It's not about you. I know you're used to it being about you, and that's sort of the baseline of your existence is, yeah, it's been about you. But it's not about you. The conversation about racism or microaggressions or the feelings of whatever person of color you just offended with your well-meaning words, your well-meaning but uneducated words. It's not about you. And if you pause, as Oluo says, maybe you can take the time to ponder the idea that this time, maybe for one of the first times in your entire whole life of white privilege, it's not about you. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that you don't exist or that you don't matter or that nobody loves you. It just means that right now it's about somebody else. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. And it doesn't hurt. It's not going to ruin you. Like, just let it be about somebody else this time. I'm being facetious a little bit, but it's so hard for white people sometimes.
So do you think that we should have...
Your very existence is like, it's about me, obviously.
Yeah.
That's a thing.
Thank you for saying that, because that is the self-centeredness of a lot of white people.
Yeah.
About me.
It is.
And I got to admit, that feeling is there for me in many cases. Even when somebody told me one day that my white privilege was showing, and I was like, what? What do you mean? That's not the case. And right away, it's about me and my poor feelings. Yeah, thanks, Bill. I appreciate that.
So, yeah.
Hey, sorry guys, there's major lag over here on my end. And my phone's ringing. Okay. This, I want to just put this back up because we say this a lot. This is across the board to ever. There's so much out there to read and learn. Go to webinars, go to conferences, do your own research on your own time, because like I said, we can't be in the middle of having to deal with all of these things on our own, and then also educate the people in the room. And everyone's been saying, taking in whatever it is that you're learning. And Richard just commented here, the first step is learning. To learning is being able to admit that you don't know. So instead
Yes.
of, flying off the handle or getting offended or maybe misunderstanding whatever significance that thing has, you acknowledge that and you take it in, and then you can move on. And then, of course, apologizing. Just freaking apologize for the love. Obviously, you're hurting someone. And if you care about another human being and their feelings, then you apologize. Even if you have no intention of learning anything else, you say you're sorry because you hurt someone else. I mean, that's like kindergarten, right?
I mean, what's an apology except just an acknowledgement that, number one, you care, and number two, you didn't do it right. It's not so hard, right? I care about you as a person, and I did something wrong. So therefore, I apologize. A plus B equals C. I really like what Richard says.
Basic, yes.
I think it's super huge. It's the humility to realize that you do not have the answers. Man, that's the key to everything, right? Even it's Buddhism where they refer to that concept as the empty vessel. Like you cannot fill up a cup that's already full of water, right? You can't put anything else in there. But if you come as an empty vessel, an empty cup, and say, I have everything to gain, that's it. And but I think this is a good point in time to remind the viewers that, hey, people of color, BIPOC folks, are not here to educate you. You have Google, you have books. There are people that have spent their life writing really great, really smart things that are here to educate you. Get on Amazon and order some of them. Support Black authors who are striving to educate you. But don't put it on your friend at work. Don't put it on your person that you know at church or whatever. They have not volunteered to educate you. It's not their responsibility. Don't put it on them. Do your own homework. Put your own work into it. That's the right thing to do. It's not their responsibility to educate you on how not to offend them.
I think it's important to also, because we say, do the homework, do the research, and maybe that might seem to some people like, oh my God, it's extra. It's all this work I have to do. But you can learn from movies. You can learn from comedy. You can learn from other people. You can learn from reading. So this idea that the research is not just, we are recommending these books. So don't walk away thinking that we're giving you homework or that you won't understand because we're telling you to go read How to Be an Anti-Racist, which is super dense and probably does require some conversation with other people if you're not willing to really do that yourself. But what you were saying, Bill, sparked a memory for me because I think there's a sketch in it's an HBO show. It's new and now I'm gonna forget it. Black Lady comedy sketch show, I think it's called, something like that. It's on HBO. It's on the second season,
like that.
And I think it was in that show where there was a sketch about Googling things, go to Google it. It the whole premise was go Google it, but find that out yourself. And it's
I have a really those of you that don't know me very
anyone
well,
have any last words
I have a
about
really
microaggressions?
I have a really sarcastic sense of humor, and there's a website out there called Let Me Google That For You, and it literally you go to the website and you can type in the search term that you want to search for somebody, and you can send them a link, and then when they click it, it actually goes to a mock-up of the Google website, and it types in the search term, and it clicks it, and then it takes them to the results. It's really sarcastic.
Amazing.
It's a very satisfying. Yeah, it's called Let Me Google That For You. Sorry. That's maybe more people of color should be using Let Me Google That For You. I don't know. Right. It's very useful.
That should be a shirt.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, we're at the top of the hour. I think we've had a great conversation about how we define microaggressions and what it does to people, and then what it also could do for the people who are perpetuating it. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I want to give the usual reminders that May is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So, hey, why don't you use that search option? Go check out some things about Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. There's a lot going on the whole month. Netflix, Hulu, all of those streaming services are, again, they're just like, hey, do you want to learn? Why don't you watch these films? And some of them are fun and funny, and some of them are serious. And hey, there's even documentaries where we can actually teach you something. So that's a way to do it if you're someone who doesn't want to pick up a book or doesn't have to, whatever. For whatever reason, whatever your intake is, however you want to consume, you can do it that way. It is also Mental Health Awareness Month. And Cornelia and I are working on a project this month with the Henrietta Weil Memorial Child Guidance Clinic. We're doing therapy Thursdays. So on Thursday, we will start our conversation about anxiety. We talked about depression the first 2 Thursdays, and the next 2 Thursdays will be about anxiety. Who's the clinician on this week?
Yanni Torres. Yanita.
Yanni Torres. So she will take the lead on that conversation, and I will interrupt her and ask her questions, and then we'll have a conversation about coping and strategies, and then where to get help. And then next week, our conversation will be about why our students are so angry. And if you don't know if they are, if that's news to you, please join us. Read the book. Google why students are angry right now. Ask around, ask some teachers. God, especially right now, right? And this is just not a great time to be a student, I don't think, for a lot of people. Or a teacher. Yay, teachers. I don't mean to forget you. Okay, that's next week. Okay, I have a funny comment that I'm going to share only because I feel like it's a cultural thing and it makes me laugh. Oh, Bill, did you want me to pull that up? So there's a word that has been, I want to say appropriated, but it's a word that's now used, that's sort of a Spanglish term that's been kind of hanging around in Spanish-speaking TV and in families. And so Natalie uses this phrase in our Facebook chat. It's Googlealo, and that means in Spanish, Google it. So thank you for reminding me, Natalie, that Googlealo is something that even Spanish-speaking people can do.
That's awesome.
That's the best.
Googlealo.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We will see you next week.
Is this Bill's last day?
Week.
Well, I will tell you, Bill, thanks for doing this.